So as we're discussing the areas of the brain, and we're moving through this card task, the bottom line is what we see is that most of us can detect and generate somatic markers that make us avoid the losing deck and generate somatic markers that allow us to continue to use the winning deck, right? Psychopaths, they demonstrate the reduced autonomic arousal, and they then show impaired performance on this card task. Now, Damasio says that they're generating the somatic markers, but they don't have the same meaning that they do to the rest of us. So neither task really tells us a lot about reactive versus instrumental aggression, and I keep going back to this basic point that, in fact, hey, there's a lot of research opportunities for those who are interested in this area. Now, reactive aggression is a response to threat. What's going on? Well, the medial frontal cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, right, are feeding signals to the medial nucleus of the amygdala, to the hypothalamus, and then there's this cascading process of the three mechanisms that move through the dorsal, periductal, right, gray, and this then operates the mechanism here. So the hypothalamus and the PAG must be functioning for signals to be sent to the amygdala to create aggression. Activation of the PAG can result in aggression without the amygdala's help or benefit. And finally, note how the frontal cortex has the ability to moderate the effect of the hypothalamus and the amygdala, which means that we do, at least some of us, have some degree of control over these ancient limbic systems that are implicated in fight or flight. Okay? So, the role then of the frontal cortex, the medial, orbital, ventrolateral frontal cortex have at least two roles in mediating those subcortical, those limbic regions. First, expectation of reward is computed, and then expectation of reward has been violated. Right? So either one of those, that reward figures into this, takes us back to the somatic marker hypothesis to a certain extent, if you will. Second, though, is a social response reversal system can be activated or modulated. Now, let's use that term again, the social response reversal system. That is, we are social animals and we attend to social cues, at least some of us that are able to process them. These can then present themselves as an intervening mechanism. Aversive social cues such as negatively valenced facial expressions such as anger, disgust, or fear can stop us in our tracks. We go, oh my God, I'm pissing someone off. I better stop right now. Have you ever had the sensation you're saying something and all of a sudden you see someone's expression go from neutral to anger and you're like, ooh, maybe I better not complete that thought, right? Maybe I better change course in the conversation. So, also social situations that might lead to social disapproval, so the impact of those observing us. Strangely, the reactive regression reversal is a product of one's position in the dominance hierarchy. And this is a fascinating idea that goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, right? And probably before them, they actually wrote about it. And what we're saying is that, man, if I'm higher in the hierarchy, then I don't have to tend to social cues to the same extent. I can basically do whatever the hell I want and get away with it because I'm top dog. But if I'm way down on the ladder, then I have to increase my attention to people higher than me in the hierarchy, so this mechanism might be more sensitive as a result of that, right? So system dysfunction as it relates to reactive aggression via heightened threat. Hey, exposure to past threats matters. It generates somatic markers. It alerts us to our position in the hierarchy, what we can get away with and what we can't, right? So we see multiple mechanisms kind of combining to show the ultimate output, right? Baseline activation thresholds can reflect individual differences observed. And this might then go way back to the experiences that have caused us as children to develop these individual differences, or they might be genetically generated. Chronic stress may increase sensitivity to the system, requiring less stress hormones to activate similar levels of response. And we know that when we're under stress, often we're triggered far more easily than when we're not under stress, right? Maternal separation may be implicated in this, that folks that have been separated from their mothers, and they've done this with animal studies, but also we have to think in terms of the cruelty that we bear witness to now. that in fact we have governmental policies that are separating children from their parents. And what then is the likely effect on those children that have been separated? How will that play out in the future? And the consequences may be in fact dire. We know it's dire for the people directly involved, but for societies in general that instigate some kind of separation policy. And when you think about it, it's probably psychologically one of the most heinous things you can do is separate parent and child. Right? Hypervigilance can be the result and exacerbate the activation of the mechanisms, and hypervigilance is also a component of what disorder? And if you're saying post-traumatic stress disorder, you'd be right on the money, right? So, the threat response then in relation to maternal separation, we see threat, right, goes up, maternal separation diminishes inhibitory processes. We've talked in the past about the internalized mother as an inhibitory process, right? So we see noradrenaline go up, we see baseline reactivity go up, and then sensitivity to threat stimuli goes up. So this may cause people to then respond more vigorously to more and more minor threats as a result of the process, to the point where we get people popping off on the smallest of threats that affect controls to a limited degree, if at all. So, 3 other dysfunctions then that we might discuss. Individual differences in the system might be innate, they might be genetic. Always we look to that, right? Reduced regulation due to disturbance of orbital or medial frontal circuitry. So maybe some level of brain damage. Right? Serotogeneric abnormalities might cause a reduction in the effectiveness of the regulatory system to threat response. And we know that serotonin is really kind of the gatekeeper and keeps everything kind of in its own area. Possible sources: genetic predisposition interacting with environmental stressors that contribute to the observed abnormalities. Right? And think about that in terms of schizophrenia. Not that schizophrenia is related to aggression, that's not where I'm going. But schizophrenia is often discussed in terms of the acquisition of schizophrenia as the diathesis stress model. That is, there's a genetic predisposition, couple that with environmental stressors, and it activates the process, which could be similar here. So, a couple things for us to kind of look at then. The biological, right, what we're talking about here is the development of reactive aggression. How might it occur? And this is where critical thinking really comes into play. Because you say, well, there could be several processes that develop or cause elevated or reduced levels of reactive aggression. So we can look at biological psychologists, biopsychologists. They're going to say, well, I want to understand the genetic contribution and then maybe how that affects the serotonergic functioning, as I described just a minute ago, or the elevated responsiveness in neurons of the amygdala, hypothalamus, and PAG, those that are associated with the fight or flight or freeze responses, right? And then we see that those affect the medial orbital frontal dysfunction, okay? Now, notice coming in from the opposite side is the environmental elements, and I'm kind of trying to describe those in terms of the diathesis stress. Here's the diathesis, this is the genetic component, right? But then it kicks into high gear with the environmental stressors. Childhood abuse is one that we can look at specifically as one of those environmental insults, and we can see how this might cause increased reactivity. Now, if we then add in a cognitive component, right, we see elevated response of basic threat system, and this is through the cognitive acquisition, learning theory, etc., and also the way the appraisal system has been trained to operate. Now, couple this with a potential dysfunction, whatever its source, right, for the response and social reversal. You know, it kind of blows my mind when I see some police officers corralling a guy and you know, they're like, okay, we're going to take you, and the guy decides to fight the police officers, and it's like, dude, they're kind of in the catbird seat at this point in time. They kind of hold the power. They're kind of dominant in the hierarchy. Fighting the police officers is probably not going to be a good choice. It's not something most of us would do. We would just simply comply. We would put our hands behind our back, we'd get cuffed, and we'd be put in the car. We wouldn't necessarily fight back. You know, the social reverse system works in most of us, right? And then the behavioral, right? Increased startle response might be the result of continued threats, right? And reactive aggression might be the result of this. Impaired performance on the RR and impaired anger recognition tasks, as we described earlier. So this area, of course, the social area, and then we see the environmental insults there. So if we understand how is this person so reactively aggressive, the explanations could be included in this slide. Some combination thereof, most likely. Now, the neurocognitive basis of psychopathy, we had to get there sooner or later. Evidence is amassing for a genetic component of psychopathy. And there may be some hereditary, and I think it's important to go back to the primary characteristics, the factor 1 characteristics opposed to the factor 2. We could see that there might be a strong genetic component to a lot of the factor 1 characteristics of psychopathy. Right? Many suggest atypical function of the amygdala from an early age that impairs one's ability to emotionally learn or interpret the somatic markers in the same way that a control would. The general hypothesis is that emotional dysfunction causes increased inability to learn appropriate motor programs for goal attainment. So, goal attainment is done in ways that are often in conflict with one's culture or society. There's a heavy contribution of SES as well as the individual learning system in this, right? And that is, then we go back to the sociologists and they say, well, you know, people basically want the same thing out of life. Unfortunately, people in different economic strata have unequal access to the things that we all desire. So this frustrating effect at lower strata might then increase the possibility, not necessarily in the number of psychopaths, but in the way they do business. Okay? Now, remember, what did Hare say? If he wasn't going to study psychopaths in prison, where are the rest of the psychopaths hanging out? Yeah, at Wall Street. Okay? So the causal model of psychopathy, well, there's probably a genetic contribution. And that then yields reduced responsiveness to neurons in the amygdala. But that's not enough yet, let's say. What else does it take? Well, impaired emotional learning as a result of this, right? Learned set of antisocial motor programs like crime pays or bullying is effective, right? And the reinforcement history, if I get away with crime, if I get away with bullying, if the social environment is one that doesn't put a lot of constraints on it, right, or actually facilitates it, then we may see this kick into high gear. And then the behavioral. We see the squalae of the emotion dysfunction. That's the factor 1, as I was talking about previously. The instrumental aggression and other antisocial acts is the factor 2 component. And then we see impaired performance on the passive avoidance or fear expression recognition task. So we see how the acquisition or the causal mechanisms that are involved in both reactive aggression and psychopathy largely might be attributed to both not both, but to biological, cognitive, and behavioral components, with the environment becoming all important in how it occurs. So, learning functions of the amygdala then, because we've been talking amygdala an awful lot. Remember Ledoux, right? Amygdala is the emotional brain. 2 parts, the basolateral, the BLA, and the central nucleus, the CEN. So conditioned stimulus, unconditioned response association. The CEN is implicated in that. The conditioned stimulus and affect representations, emotional tone linked to, right, the BLA, but not the CEN. And conditioned stimulus, valence, sensory response properties of the unconditioned stimulus association, right? In the BLA, but not the CEN. And for those of you who enjoy Pavlovian condition, dig deep. This is going a little bit beyond what I want to test you on, so I wouldn't expect to see a question on the quiz here. We're getting pretty damn neuroscience-y there. So, the amygdala is necessary for CSUR associations. The amygdala is necessary for CS reinforcement associations, but not for conditioned stimulus, conditioned response associations, and those represent pure learning, if you will. There's nothing inherent in those. All these associations can be appetitive, that means approach-oriented, or aversive, avoidance-oriented. Psychopaths appear to demonstrate significantly more dysfunction to the aversive rather than the appetitive associations. So psychopaths are not really inhibited from approaching things that they find desirable, but they do seem to have an inhibition in processing negative stimuli that should lead to aversive behaviors. They don't necessarily see that. So we see impaired learning and aversive conditioning as a result of this process. Okay. So summing up this amygdala dysfunction, sad, fearful expressions are thought to act as unconditioned stimulus, right? And that is built in. Psychopaths are impaired in processing these stimuli, thus interfering with their potential socialization. So remember those facial expressions. Psychopaths need a lot more information than controls do to recognize a facial expression, and we see a whole bunch of mechanisms that would interfere with them responding to those facial expressions. Probably all best understood as amygdala dysfunction. So we've gone a long way around the loop here to get back to the amygdala as the primary implicated mechanism. Okay. Now, I want to take a look at just a single research, well, set of research studies from a single researcher, and it's just an example of many, and this is where the research is headed in this day and age. And if you're fascinated in this, jump on board. Find a lab, find a graduate school, find someone where you can enter into this game of understanding the psychopath. So this is an example of neuro-level functional differences. Subtitle, is laughter the best medicine? I don't know. Well, for most of us, yes. And S.E. Viting is going to take us through this. We see, is laughter contagious? For most of us, it sure is. But for boys at risk of developing psychopathy as adults, do not demonstrate the same urge. So this is tricky to acquire the sample and say these are boys that have qualities that would be indicative of potentially later diagnosis of psychopathy, right? So boys were selected as at risk of being previously labeled as persistently disruptive, right? 62 disruptive boys were compared to 30 normally behaved boys, and that would be one issue that you could take serious issue with in this study. Right? All were subjected to fMRI with laughter and crying stimuli. Man, neuroscience at its best. Self-reports indicated boys from disruptive behavior combined callousness traits did not want to engage in laughter to the same degree as controls. So something about their laughter mechanism isn't the same as controls. All boys demonstrated brain activity that indicated recognizing laughter to equal degrees, but the response was different, right? So, is laughter contagious? Well, all boys demonstrated brain activity that indicated recognizing laughter to equal degrees, so it isn't that they're not recognizing it in this particular sample and paradigm. Disruptive boys showed reduced brain activity in the anterior insula and supplementary motor area brain regions that are thought to facilitate responding with other people's emotions and joining in their laughter. So laughter is not contagious for these boys at a neural level. Viting suggests that the boys at risk to develop psychopathy don't experience the world like the rest of us. So while the rest of us are falling into the contagion of laughter, the psychopathic boys are not psychopathic boys, the boys that have greater potential to become psychopaths. This study is somewhat unique and it explores reaction to positive emotional displays and subsequent desires generated at brain level mechanisms. So we talked about the focus on negative emotion, but here's a study that focuses on positive emotion and shows that it's not easily transmitted or shared with these potentially psychopathic boys. And there's more that you can read on this if you so choose. That's about all I got for psychopathy this time around. So, you guys take care. You have a great day. and enjoy your artichokes. Or not, and that's what those are. Bye.